go through the assignment. So I did a little bit of a pacer just so that it's going to help you a little bit. And I'll go through sort of every question. Obviously, not going to give you the answer, but sort of give you an understanding of what you should be looking for and how probably you should be answering. I mean, even if we use the entire session just on this, I don't mind because I think I'm a little bit ahead because today I was going to do the entire learning unit 3, theme 1 and theme 2, but it's broken up. We were supposed to only do the recording of theme 2 next week, but it's fine. I don't mind doing a recording of theme 3, 1 and 2 next week, even if we have to focus on this today, just so that everybody's up to speed and it's your first supply chain assignment. So I know everybody wants to do the best that they can possibly do. So I'm here to support that. I just want to share my screen so I can take you through the pacer quickly. Okay, so I'm not going to show the assignment specifically. I'm going to show the pacer, and then we're going to take it from there, right? If you have any questions, please unmute yourself because I can't see my back end of my screen, all right? So firstly, your actual assignment is based on a case study. Your first part of it is actually a case study or a scenario. And there's a whole host of different questions. As you can see, it goes from question 1.1 right down to question 4. All right. So your actual case study or your scenario is based on a company called Technova, which is a South African smartphone manufacturer. And it basically tells you a whole host of things about Technova, who the people are, all of that, and what their action plan is. So it's a little bit of a one-page case study. Question 1.1, okay, goes into them having a meeting in Technova, and they need to have an explanation of supply chain to make sure that everybody is on the same page. So you need to explain to the members of the meeting the 4 key elements of Technova supply chain. Okay, so you have to explain each element in the context of Technova. So firstly, the information on the 4 key elements. You can find this. It's part of Learning Unit 1, Theme 1, and it's sitting currently in Chapter 1. All right. I didn't go as far as giving you page numbers because then I'll be doing a lot more work than I'm supposed to be doing, or I'm giving you less work. All right. So it is Learning Unit 1, Theme 1, Chapter 1, and you're looking at the 4 different elements. So in question 1.1, it is currently for 8 marks. So basically how, when we're looking, and I think the best way for me to explain it to you is to explain to you how I would be marking it, because that will give you more of an indication of what you should be, how you should be answering the question. So with that 8 marks specifically, you're going to probably get 2 marks per elements, right? So you need to put in the 4 different elements. And I'll tell you, layman terms speaking, when you're looking at supply chain, what goes into a supply chain? So look at it from when you purchase your raw materials, then your manufacturing, which is part of operations, how you're going to manufacture all of the material, how you're going to transport the material, and then the last part is how is it that your supply chain works with different scenarios in the business. So whether it is, you know, your planning process or your supplier process, anything from it that's integrated within your supply chain. So that forms part of your elements. And you want to explain it in terms of what that element is, and basically explain a little bit of how Technova can use this. So in reference to Technova, if that makes sense. Okay, so for 8 marks, 2 marks each, write enough theory and then write a bit from an application perspective. Okay. Then if we look at question 1.2, we've got Learning Unit 1, Theme 1, Chapter 1. So in the same chapter itself, 1.2 is now talking about the different key trends in supply chain management and how these can be applied to Technova. So This is going for 12 marks. And one of the tips that they're giving you in the question paper is you need to conduct research beyond your prescribed textbook. So, and I said this from the beginning, always understand what's happening in the market. Go to other sources, go to Google Scholar if you need to pull out some, previous articles that was written, just so that you can bring in some sort of external example when it comes to um, uh, answering your question and trying to do application. So when we're talking about the different key trends, we want to talk about how best can you reduce some of your supply chain costs. What reduction can they be done? Maybe it's from a purchasing perspective. Maybe you want to try and manage your demand and supply with inventory. Then are you trying to do green your supply chain, whether it means you're doing recycling, maybe you're doing something more from a carbon footprint perspective, something from a sustainability side. And all of this, you have to relate it to Technova itself. So let's say, for instance, 12 marks, you probably will have 4 marks per trend. Okay, so let's say 3 trends, 4 marks. And you probably, in each trend, you're going to have theory, and then you're going to have application to Technova. So 2 marks for the theory, 2 marks for the application, and you're going to have 3 trends like that to give you your 12 marks. So sort of looking at it from that perspective, that's how you probably should be answering your questions. Okay. So when it comes to supply chain, application is very important. Do not rely solely on theory. It is not going to work out for you. Majority of the marks, or at least 50 to 60% of the marks for a particular question, is application. It's not just you spitting it out. I want to understand if you understand the question itself. Okay. So 1.2, 12 marks there. Key trends, 4 marks per trend, and 2 marks for theory, 2 marks for application. Okay. Is there any questions before I go on to question 2? No. Okay, cool. Thank you. Then we go on to question 2, which is Porter's value chain. It has different support activities. In the question, they want you to discuss the support activities that Technova would have in place, and you need to provide a contextual example for each activity. So Porter's value chain, also found in chapter 1, but it's falling under theme 2. For this one, predominantly, you need to look at the structures that support the actual value chain, whether it's purchasing, procurement, HR, technology, the business itself in terms of the infrastructure, whatever that may be, those would fall part of the support structure specifically. So for this question, in question 2, it's made up of 20 marks, part of learning unit 1 and your chapter 1. You're probably going to look at getting, just want to try and see, 5, 10, probably 5 marks per point or per paragraph, if I can say that. So every support structure that you have, say that will be 5 marks. You would use probably 2 marks out of that for theory, so something that you're getting from the textbook. Please, NB, you need to reference. If there is no referencing, there will be penalties, so you will not get marked accordingly, and you will also get subtracted marks. So please make sure that you reference in text and end of document. If you are unsure of anything, I need you to go and visit the library prior to your assignment due. I think your assignment's due on the 29th, if I'm not mistaken. So that assignment will then be, it will go through your plagiarism, so turn it in. turn it in, will then spit out. I know I'm deflecting a little bit, but I want to at least tell you before I forget. Plagiarism, it'll go through Turnitin, and I get a percentage. You can always check your percentage. So you will get your percentage. If your percentage is anything above, I would say 15%, you need to rework that document and resubmit. You have multiple opportunities to resubmit that document as long as it's before the due date. So if your due date is the 29th of August at 23:59, you need to submit it in advance to get your Turnitin. I think your Turnitin is almost you get it at the same time. The after submission, you would get your percentage. If it's anything more than 15%, I need you to really look at your document to try and bring that number down. When I do see a number that goes into the orange or to the red, and you'll know what I'm talking about when you submit, immediately it starts giving me a red flag, and I now start looking into certain references, etc. So make sure you are doing this correctly, right? Oh yes, and I did say you can submit multiple times as long as it's before the due date. I will take the latest submission. So if your last submission is at 23:50, I will take that submission. If it's at 20, let's say it's exactly midnight, okay, or 1 minute past midnight, it's now considered late. You then have a deduction on your paper, but I will mark that paper. I won't mark the paper before that. Okay. I did have a few questions about that last semester, so I'm just putting it out there in case somebody has that question in mind but is afraid to ask. Okay, coming back to question 2. So we have 5 marks per support activity, 2 marks for theory, 2 marks for application, and 1 mark for using a contextual example, for instance, or 3 marks for using a contextual example. I don't know what the memorandum is basically telling us specifically. However, I'm just giving you from experience. 2 marks will be for theory and 3 marks will be for application, including your example, or 2 marks for application and 1 mark for an example. But you need to always speak about, like, for instance, if you are looking at the specific questions on Porter's value activities, you're talking about, let's say it's human resources, you're going to talk about human resources is one of the support activities to make sure that the people and their workforce is a key element within the business. This is what human resources, their main function is, to make sure that IR is accountable, the employer is accountable, the employee is doing the best that they can in terms of their KPIs, their goal management, etc. And when you're talking about different examples, you're now going to bring in an example from in context of Technova. Technova is a technology company, and I mean, you can think of various different elements. You know, maybe pick on the fact that I think in their question they spoke about their CFO or their COO. You can talk about what they do in terms of, you know, they had a severe storm and it caused a lot of damage to their factory and it disrupted a lot of their production. To meet the market demand, the company must quickly address the situation to minimize the impact on its operations and its customer. So maybe you can talk from an HR perspective or human resources perspective, what the business has done or can do in terms of human resources and how they can impact how this can impact Technova specifically, and also influence their support activity as part of their value chain, or how it can be positive towards their value chain. So I want you to speak on elements like that. So it's not that challenging. Not going to lie to you. It is something where you just need to make sure you've got your theory in order. Once you start writing your theory and you understand your case study, you can very quickly relate your case study to that theory. Always use external examples, and I'll say it again and again and again, because it just shows that you are doing a lot more research than, you know, than just the bare minimum. Okay. Then we have our next question, which is question 3.1, which is forming part of learning unit 2, theme 1, which sits in chapter 3. And the question is, to ensure that Technova does not experience similar disruptions that could result in losing key customers, they want to improve their value chain through outsourcing and supplier selection. They want you to conduct research beyond your prescribed textbook and provide a brief explanation of the concept of outsourcing. So what I would do is, number one, do not use your textbook for this because it tells you beyond your textbook. Always look for other sources of where outsourcing has now subsequently worked for that specific business, and then understand where outsourcing, sits in the context of business, especially in the business industry in which Technova is part of. So we all know that outsourcing is where you are buying materials or different components from suppliers instead of you making it in-house. I mean, we discussed this in our last live lecture. So you want to now contract that business out, which you may have performed previously, but you now decided to go external for the reason that it just makes sense because it's not your core focus or your core responsibility as part of your business specifically. So it does say a note, a direct quote will not be marked. A reference from a credible source other than your prescribed textbook is required. All right. So that's question 3.1. It's only for 5 marks, but 5 marks does count in the end. So just giving me 5 points is not going to work. Okay, we need you to expand on it, use external sources, pull in definitions from others, give me what you think the benefits of outsourcing is going to be. I actually think that comes in the next question, but tell me what role outsourcing plays in a lot of businesses, right?
Sorry, ma'am, it's actually 2 marks. I just wanted to check. Yeah,
okay.
it's a small mark allocation. How long, if you have to give me an idea, how long on a 2-mark question must the answer be?
If it's 2 marks, I would say you can probably do I'm talking, you want to know lines or you want to talk words? But
lines on a page, lines is okay.
Yes. Okay, so if you have to go lines for 2 marks, I would say roughly about 5 or 6. But another thing which I've seen previously in grading, a student will repeat the first line with the second line with the third line and don't give me anything differently, then you're going to get 1 mark. Okay, but if you're going to tell me 2 different points and it's now in 4 lines or 5 lines, then that's perfect. As long as you're giving me context that I can give you a tick for, if that makes sense.
Okay, it does. Thank you.
Okay. Cool. Thank you for pointing out that it was 2. I think I went a little bit dyslexic there. 3.2, okay, is learning unit 2, theme 1, sitting in chapter 3, also has to do with outsourcing. So think of the company Technova. They are outsourcing the transport from their warehouse to their customers. With the use of examples, you need to discuss any 2 benefits and any 2 risks that's now associated with outsourcing. So you need to discuss your benefit and your risk in the context of Technova, and that is for 8 marks, right? So here I would say for 8 marks, you're probably going to do 2 marks for every benefit. So probably 2 benefits and 2 risks. So the first one, like for instance, if I have to say one of the benefit for outsourcing is you have better flexibility, for instance. When you do have better flexibility, you can go to various different suppliers. You don't have to only stick with one supplier. Technova now has the benefit of, say, horse trading, but doing a cost price comparison with different service providers, etc. Maybe there's a reduction of staff costs because you may not need 100 staff anymore. You may only need 50 staff because you're outsourcing the balance of the work. And then how does this now benefit Technova? So that will be 2 marks each. which will now give you 4 from a benefit perspective, and then 4 marks from a risk side. And you want to mention 2 risks. What would be the risk? Maybe it would be where your supplier or the person you are outsourcing to is not performing the function up, to the point of where it's according to what your expectation is, and then explain it from a Technova side. So that's where your application will come into play. And then if you may also have too much of dependence on a supplier, that is also a big risk, because you're now putting all of your effort into your supplier doing X, Y, and Z for you, and you're not looking out and seeing what the market industry or what it would cost for you to do insourcing. So explain it in that perspective from a Technova side as well. So that will be 4 marks for benefits, 4 marks for risk. Probably give me 2 benefits and 2 risk with an application. Okay. Then we're going to go into question 3.3, and this is sitting in Learning Unit 2, Theme 2, and still in Chapter 3. And here we did speak about it in our last live lecture when we were talking about supply selection. So when deciding on a supplier, there's a checklist that Technova would need to use to ensure that they evaluate the suitability of their supplier. You need to discuss the 4 key factors that Technova will need to consider when selecting a supplier. The good thing with this question here, 3.3, they are giving you a rubric. Okay, your rubric is telling you that for 20 marks, the theory is going to consider to be 8 marks and your application is going to be 12 marks. Okay, so you know how to basically break that down. So when we're talking about supplier selection, you want to talk about different elements like their quality. The quality levels are obviously important. It needs to be quite consistent. You want to talk about cost. What is the landed cost of an item, the different payment terms, the different discounts. You need somebody that's reliable. So these are all some of the reasons, or what is the criteria when you are selecting a supplier specifically. As you said, theory is 8, application is 12. So you're probably going to do 2 marks per supplier selection. So criteria. So let's say 4 criterias. You're going to have 2 marks each, which will give you 8 marks. And then your application will then be 3 marks per criteria. So 3 times 4 is then 12. So then that will cover your question 20. Okay. Is there any questions so far? We're good. Okay. Then our last question, question 4, is Learning Unit 2. Theme 2, Chapter 3. So you can see it's predominantly focused within 2 chapters, which is 1 and 3. And in question 4, this is a big one. It's your essay question. And I want to start with first explaining the rubric before I jump into the question. So the rubric says, the first thing is your structure of your essay and your clarity of your writing. So correct essay structure, introduction, body, and conclusion. For 3 marks. I look for this, all right? I look for a student basically having a correct structure of their essay where they're having it into 3 parts. So your introduction is introducing that specific topic. Your body is all the different elements that the question is asking for. And then conclusion is you closing up the topic, all right? That's a mark for each. You basically get that. Then the second part of it is your content. So your content is, it's 5 reasons why Technova should consider having multiple suppliers, all right? So your question specifically is asking you, in an essay format, convince Technova to stop using a single supplier, and now they need to start using multiple suppliers so they can mitigate the risk associated with a single supplier. So for 15 marks, you need to provide them with 5 reasons why Technova should now start using multiple suppliers as opposed to single suppliers. So you're basically gonna now list each one, all right? So each sort of reason, you can say that. So you're probably going to look at 5 different reasons, maybe 3 different reasons, actually. Probably going to look at 3 different reasons, and just want to do my math quickly. Okay, so 5 different reasons. You're probably going to do 3 marks each for what that reason is, and probably 2 marks each for what that application is going to be. So when we're talking about the reasons for choosing a multiple supplier as opposed to a single supplier, you want to say you want to spread the risk. You don't want to keep all the risk with one supplier, for instance. You also want to create some sort of element of competition with the suppliers. You don't, if you have all your eggs in one basket, unfortunately your supplier becomes very complacent, and they tend to just do things because they know that you're never going to go to somebody else, or you're never going to give up their contract, etc. So you now need to encourage some sort of competition amongst the different suppliers. Maybe it's from a capacity perspective, if you have it all with one supplier, if the supplier cannot meet the deadline, what do? You now do not have your supply to meet your demand. So you're now going to speak from a theoretical perspective for 3 marks over 5 different points of the reasoning, and then you're going to do application for 2 marks per point. So in total, it should give you 15 marks for your reasons and 10 marks from an application perspective. Okay, which I think is self-explanatory. It's in the rubric. And then your third one is your overall argument and its comprehensiveness of your answer, the balance of breadth and depth, your ability to build a coherent essay from the ideas contained in multiple sources. So it's basically saying you are not only using the textbook in terms of you defining your 5 reasons and building up your 3 marks per reason specifically, and then your practical example that you're using, you did do additional research, and it's not just you sitting thinking about what reason can I put here, or what practical example or application can I use here. I also look at sentence construction, if that makes sense. If I have to read the question 3 times or the answer 3 times, and it does become a bit difficult, you may not be able to get me in your argument. So I will look at that from that perspective. If you are doing a lot of repetition in your answers, then I look at that because it's not obviously comprehensive enough for me. Yeah, and that basically builds your 30 marks in total for that specific essay. I think, if you really look at the assignment, it's not that bad. Within 2 chapters, you'll be able to cover bulk portion of the theory using external sources. But please, I have to stress, every single question that's in this assignment right now has an application portion. You need to do your application the best way that you possibly can. And then, yeah, you can take it from there. Okay. Is there any questions? I'm sure there'll be questions. Any questions? Nothing. Okay. So your assignment specifically is due on the 29th of August at 23:59. Please, and I'll repeat it again. It needs to be in that assignment template that I shared with you. If you haven't seen it, it's on ARC. The assignment template is available. I need you to use that information because it just puts everything into a more structured assignment. And number 2, try and keep to the font sizes as provided, and try and space out your work in the best way that you possibly can. There is nothing about a maximum word count, or it needs to stick within a specific word element. So please use your discretion. You obviously do not want to write out 10 pages for a 10-mark question. So use your discretion and understanding when you're answering these questions. When you do submit your assignment, please know that you will get a Turnitin percentage. Please do not go more than 15%. Even if it is 15%, go and double check it. Understand where it's coming from. If you are copying and pasting from somebody else's work, it is not going to work. You will be penalized. So there's two different elements when it comes to the referencing being penalized. Number one is minor referencing, and number two is major referencing. So your minor referencing is if you have a sentence or two or a few paragraphs where it's being sort of paraphrased and not being referenced appropriately, then you'll go into minor referencing. And then I think that's a 5 mark deduction. And it can go up to 15 marks into major deductions, taking into account that you did not do an in-text referencing, or you did not do an in-text referencing, or whatever that is. So make sure that you are doing that properly. Look at the IIE guide for referencing. If not, it's very similar to the Harvard referencing guide. So look into that. Roughly what happens once you submit your assignment, because I want to go through the process with you. When you submit your assignment, let's say it's on the 29th of August, a memo will be released to me around about, I would say, that Monday, or that the next day. I think the 29th is a Friday, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so the next working day is now the Monday. I now have 7 days to grade your assignment, right? So that takes me right up to the 9th of September. So your results will basically be released either on the 10th or the 11th of September. I try and give them 2 weeks after. I try and get all my grading done over the weekends, okay, because sometimes the weekdays are a bit tough for me. So I try and get everything done over the weekend, and which I'm still within my 7 days. So I'll have it done, let's say the Saturday or the Sunday. Based on that, your results will then be live for you by, I would say, between the 8th and the 9th. Right. So just so that I'm giving you some sort of expectations of what, what's coming. Yeah, and that's basically where we're at. I know your ICE task. The ICE task, I don't take 7 days to mark it. I try and get to it either sometimes a little bit quicker. By this week, end of this week, you'll have all of your ICE tasks released to you. The second ICE task release date is today, because your next ICE task due date is the 26th of August, which is a week from today. So I will release that post the session, so you at least have that information with you and you can now start running with it. And you'll see the topic is, it's actually having to do a lot more with today's topic. And I don't think we're going to get through to everything. So what I'm probably going to do, now that I think about it realistically, I will release it today, but I'll make the due date a week after. All right. So not next week Tuesday. I'll do it the following Tuesday, because by next week Tuesday, I'll have to release the content for you. All right. So I don't want you to do an ICE task before I actually do the lecture on it. It's on preferential procurement and bid committee, bid adjudication, all of those things. So everything that has to do with legislation when it comes to supply chain, especially from a South Africa concept, triple BE, triple PFA, all of those concepts, all of that's in the lecture that we were meant to do in the second part of today's lecture. All right, which I don't think we're going to even get time to do it. I can probably do the first 2 slides, and the bulk portion of it, we're probably not going to get chance to get through to it. But I'll do a recording on that for you. Yeah. So let's say your ICE task will then be due around about I'd like to say, I'll do it at the end of that week, which is the 5th of September, okay? So that I don't put you under pressure, because I know your assignment will just be released around about the 29th is when you would submit it. So I'll give you another week thereafter to submit ICE task 2. But it'll be in the due date when I post it on tonight. You will then see that the due date is now the 5th of September. Is there any questions so far?
Thank you so much. That's a very big relief. The ICE task was also stressing me closer to the assignment one. Yeah. Also, just one question with the essay question. I'm asking you lots of questions regarding how long you'd like the essay to be and how long the yeah. So you're looking at 3 pages, 2 pages, 5 pages.
So for 30 marks, I mean, if we have to look at, okay, leave the intro conclusion because that's probably going to be 5-6 lines each, right? If we're looking at the reasons for why Technova should consider having multiple suppliers, you're looking at 5 marks per reason, which is 5 reasons. You're probably looking at roughly about a half a page per reason. So you're probably going to do probably going to say about 3 to 4 pages to be safe. Yeah, 3 to 4 typed out pages. If you look at half a page movies, and does make a little bit more sense because they also don't give you, unfortunately, word indication in this assignment. So you wouldn't know where to start or where to end because, yeah, it's not easy marking 10 pages of an essay. So 3 to 4 is more than enough as long as you are covering the content that is required. It doesn't matter how much you write. You can write 10 pages, but if it makes no sense at all, unfortunately, you're not going to get any marks. Yeah, I think that is the. Any other questions while you have me here? No other questions. All right. Let's do like at least 1 or 2 slides. We have time. So let's rather do that. Okay. Don't want to cut the session short and then we are. Okay, so we're now gone into learning unit 3. I've combined theme 1 and theme 2 together. All right, so in this particular theme 1, theme 2, we've got 6 different variations, which we're going to go through. And we're talking about the evolution of supply chain management. So basically where it started, that sort of thing. The different legislative frameworks, something called value for money, government planning, procurement methods, and then role players. Okay. And if we have to start with the evolution of supply chain, we're talking about how supply chain sort of started within a South African context, and sort of where it is from a current or an emerging trend perspective. All right. So the first one that we're going to look at is sort of from a very early development. So let's call it sort of pre-90, where things were quite decentralized in terms of where we were at from a government perspective, a procurement perspective. The system was quite fragmented, quite slow. So it went more into trying to get supply chain into more preferential procurement or going into a more transparency route. Then we want to talk into the different transition process. So if we go into sort of like the 90s, we want to talk about, from a PP, triple PFA, so Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Acts, go into where businesses basically there's a lot of regulations from a government perspective where they introduce a lot of point-based preference systems, especially for people that come from a disadvantaged background, and it had to do with bidding from a procurement perspective. So whether it was tenders or different sort of e-bids that had to go through different committees, that sort of thing. So different supply chain regulations across, whether it was from a national or provincial or even a municipality level, a lot of that regulations were sort of brought into play more along the 2003s, 2005s, where they wanted more uniformity, more standardization, etc. We can argue the point on whether there's uniformity and standardization, but it's in theory, that's basically where the aim was going into. Then we went more into sort of like a digitization or a technology or an innovation perspective, where you're going into digital transformation with something that gave a lot of businesses real-time information, automation, some tracking information. You had the integration of AI. I mean, Chat GPT is a lot of people's uncles right now. You know, it's not the best uncle when it comes to doing assignments, but you know, it sort of dovetails you into the wrong direction a lot of times, but it does help, like in a workplace, to sound a lot more professional, etc. People are looking for that sort of AI interface. It is taking a little bit of the personal touch out of it, but it does help people generate some sort of requisition. You want, especially when we're talking technology and innovation, the digital transformation stage, we want to see a lot more, I think, especially from a South African perspective, with businesses going more into the e-commerce sector or the e-retailer sector, where there's better visibility, you know, better planning being done. There's better demand forecasting, where you know how much you need to produce for your specific customer or the market itself. When we're talking visibility, we're talking about now from a logistics perspective, real time, you know. There's businesses that can give you an instant POD for when your stuff's delivered. They can do route planning for you from a logistics perspective. I mean, when we look at first world countries, they have drones that's delivering items, you know. So this is where sort of digitization is going into. When we're talking about current trends, we're talking about 2020 and, you know, sort of post, I say post-COVID, and sort of other disruptions, would it sort of push supply chain into a more stronger sort of risk management, where people are keeping the risk at bay, as opposed to just going out there and going into a lot more importation. They're trying to find a lot more local suppliers that can cater to their needs in case they're now put into a predicament where it's a bit of an agile market. They also become a lot more resilient and adaptable, because you're now trying to mirror some sort of global supply chain shift in South Africa, which is very difficult for us to do because we do function a lot from an import perspective. So that's sort of like the evolution. It just gives you a very brief synopsis of where business was to where or where supply chain was to where supply chain now has come, right? Okay, then we're going to go into legislative frameworks. Okay, this is not a very interesting topic. I'm not going to lie to you. It's there's a lot of theory. There's a lot of you'll see even in your probably your second assignment or something. This is one of the questions there. It almost always comes out. Your ICE task is based on not legislative framework specifically, but to do with this specific learning unit. So there's different, obviously, pieces of legislation that's applicable to supply chain, different mandates, especially from a South Africa perspective. So number one is your Constitution of South Africa, or say, and basically this is your public procurement, where the mandate is you need to be fair, you need to be equitable, you need to be competitive and transparent, etc. So it allows for your actual preferential policy or procurement policy to address any sort of past inequalities that happen. You know, maybe someone's unfairly treated, they weren't able to get a bid or a specific tender, etc. But this is basically the foundation for all supply chain management related sort of like laws and policies, so constitution. Then you have something called the Preferential Procurement Policy Framework, so the PPPFA, Act 5 of 2000. And this just gives you a bit of a legal framework or when you want to implement something of a preferential procurement. Whether you want to do a points-based system. So with preferential procurement, as a business myself, I can go out and I can do a tender or a bid with local companies. I need to make sure that my selection is quite fair. When my selection, especially if I'm getting any sort of funding or financial aid from government itself, I need to be able to show them what suppliers I'm now bringing on board. And in this case, you're probably going to go on an 80-20 or a 90-10 preference points. 80 probably being price, 20 being triple BE, or 90 being price, and 10 being triple BE. So there's a lot of different other frameworks that goes in, like value add, solutions, etc. But two of the majority of topics that come into play is triple BE status and your price, right? Then I think the key from the triple PFA specifically is you want to basically redress any economic imbalances, especially from a procurement perspective. And if you are getting that specific fundings, you need to provide documentation to say, this is the reason why I went with X supplier or Y supplier. Then we have our triple BE, which is broad-based Black economic empowerment. And basically it promotes the participation of previously disadvantaged groups, right? It affects your supply chain through the scorecards that you get as a business. So you obviously have various different gradings and various different scores from a triple BE perspective, and you work on a level. And then there's a lot of other things that come into play. Are you Black woman empowered? Are you from a Black management perspective, empowered? Do you have sustainability within your business? So these are some of the, do you have CSR within your business? So this is just part of the different scorecards. And you want to talk about triple BE specifically is more from a transformational perspective, where you want to transform some of your procurement practices specifically. Okay, then we want to talk on local production and content framework. So with local production and content, it specifically speaks to promoting local manufacturing and job creation by basically having different designated areas or sectors to comply with your minimal local content, whether there's a threshold that's provided. So a lot of it has to do with the DTI, so Department of Trade and Industry, as well as the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. And it's specifically applied to when you have tenders where local production is strategic. So especially if you have to look at it from a mining perspective, if you're going to a specific area in South Africa and you decide that you want to go into mining, part of your supply chain, you need to start state where is the local manufacturing coming from, where is the job creation in the local market coming from. Okay. Then we have preferential procurement regulations, and this basically sets out very specific implementation ways of how you can, how you're going to set out your tender. So your triple PFA has your 80-20 or your 90-10 sort of preference points. Your preferential procurement regulation will step out that implementation. It'll tell you how your triple BE levels are defined, how it's incorporated into the tender evaluation. It'll then stipulate different things about your local content, your thresholds, your job creation, and any other supplier that you want to target. Anything from a subcontracting or multiple supplier perspective, it will state all of this in your PPR. Okay. Then I'll just go through, some of the abbreviations, it's for you to go through in your time specifically, but just so that you'll have an understanding. Your CIDB is from a construction industry perspective. So that's your construction industry, I think it's development boards. And it basically regulates your construction procurement and your public sector construction procurement specifically, where your contractors need to be registered. They need to be up to a certain grade level, based on their capabilities, their tertiary education or secondary education, etc., and they need to comply with those sort of regulations. Then you've got your POPI, which is protection of personal information, and how this affects your supply chain specifically is how you protect personal and company information, how it's being processed, how it's being stored. When you speak on it from a logistics perspective, like me specifically, I work in an environment where we have conditional deliveries. We can go out and deliver something to a customer, and in return, I need a proof of address, I need an ID copy, so I need sort of like RICA, FICA documents. That is personal information from people. I need to then stipulate to them what's my element of POPI Act. How do I now store this? Do I upload it into a cloud where it's now visible to everybody, or is it stored in a jet-tight non-error system, and the hard copies are then saved on in a box that's now sitting in sort of like DocuFile or Iron Mountain that's now sealed and protected and all of those things. So especially when you're dealing with people's personal and private information, you need confidentiality, you need consent, all of those things. Then you've got PAIA, which is protection of promotion of access to information. And it's basically anything from an access perspective to procurement records, whether it is a tender document that is that the public can request or the bidder can request, whether it's an evaluation report. So in your evaluation report, if you're going into something that is 80-20, so let's say 20% is BE, but the 80 is price, value add, solutions, CSR, what can you do from a partnership perspective, etc. That sits in your evaluation document or evaluation report. So having access to that information, and also when a bid is being awarded to a company, what is the decision? Like, are you now making that public? Because the PAIA basically allows or states that you need access to this sort of information. Okay, it wants to support as much transparency as possible, and something from an accountability side. Then we've got PAJA, which is your promotion of admin justice. And it's basically, to give you some sort of administrative action, for it to be fair, for it to be lawful, etc. So if something from a bidder perspective, if somebody bids for a contract or a tender and they are unfairly treated, they have the right to ask for the reasons, or they have the right to challenge any sort of decision. So it does help because it now prevents you going into anything from an arbitrary perspective or an unfair disqualification or discrimination perspective. Then we have PRECA, which is Prevention of Combating Corrupt Activities Act. So it's sort of basically you want to minimize corruption or bribery and fraud, especially when it comes to procurement perspective. So it mandates anything from, especially if a public official comes into a business, to report anything from corrupt activity side. I know what I'm saying sometimes not always is actionable, but this is basically what the policies state. They want something that is more ethical, especially from a supply chain management practice side. You want to rid corruption and be as fair as you possibly can. And then the last one is CETA, which is State Information Technology Act. And this basically governs anything from an IT perspective or an information technology perspective, from a procurement side. So whether it is ways in which you can eliminate duplication, you can enhance your value for money, you can promote anything from an IT sort of from a governance perspective. So your CETA basically helps supply chain processes that involve anything from an ICT information technology perspective. Okay, The next topic we're going to go into is value for money. Okay, and we're going to go into the different points from when we look at value for money. We're going to go into government strategic planning, okay, so the different types of government strategic planning, what's required, etc. And then sourcing strategies. If you do have to find a supplier when you are sourcing them, what's sort of the normal sort of documentation that you need, and sort of the benefits of that. And then the different sort of role players in the supply chain. So your bid specification committee, evaluation and adjudication committee, and this is the role player part of it is the one that comes up predominantly when we're looking at it from a assignment or a examination perspective. Okay, so I am going to do the next few slides from value for money in a recording for next week. But for now, we just did our first, I think, 2 or 3 slides. And yeah, I'll continue the next in the next session. Yeah. And I think from my side, basically, just all the best for the assignment. Please know that my number is available. So please do send me a message, WhatsApp me, send me an email. I'm a lot quicker on WhatsApp than I am on the email. So please do send me a message if you are stuck with anything at all with your assignment, and I'm there to help you. All right. Any questions at all before we close off? I hope this session did help and gave you a little bit more clarity. If you were having challenges when you looked at the assignment and you got a bit scared, I hope today at least put a little bit of ease within you. It made you feel a little bit better that it's actually not so bad.
It really did, especially the fact that I now know where to find the information, like the learning units and which chapter. I was battling with that.
Okay, well, I'm glad. Well, if you get stuck anywhere else, please don't hesitate to call me. I'm here to support you. I'm not here to spit out a textbook to you. I'm here to support you as much as I can. Okay. Okay, guys, have a good evening and all the best. I know you have another week and a half left for submission. So all the best in the next week and a half, and I look forward to grading your assignments. Thank you.